Welcome to the Stephen King Connected Universe. When I was in sixth form college, this was about 10, 12 years ago now, so quite a while ago, one of the exams, it was a compulsory course, so we all had to take it, and one of the exam questions I was given, again, it could be random questions, but one of the questions I was given was an essay question. I had to answer, what makes a classic novel? And in my answer, I posited that it was a mixture of popularity, quality, and age. Things have to be considered good for a while. You have to see how they inspire things, all of that. I even suggested that in the future we would consider the works of Stephen King as classic literature, almost a modern day kind of Charles Dickens, if you will. And with that, there's also this talk of the great American novel. And who's going to write it, but I can't help but kind of think it has been written and it's in the works of Stephen King, and it's just buried in amongst the pulp, the thrills and the scares, and within that there's this kind of the story and history of America. I mean, in recent years King has been accused of maybe being too political in his work or putting too much of his own political views into his work, but I would argue that Stephen King has always been political. I'm not American, and whilst the films and television of Hollywood have shown me one version of America, I feel that through the works of King, I've seen it, well, maybe it's true face, but a different face of it. And I even look at, at the beginning of The Stand by Stephen King, he quotes Jungle Land by Bruce Springsteen. And I often see both Stephen King and Bruce Springsteen in like a really similar light. They've got popularity on this immense scale, popularity which hasn't hampered their ambition or their quality. Together they paint this kind of picture that defines America in the late, or say the 70s and the 80s. They both seem to have like a creative dip in the 90s, only to kind of hit a purple patch again in the 2010s. And where Springsteen is probably one of my favorite musical artists. Seen him 3 times. Like, Stephen King is one of my favorite authors, and I would say that right now there has never been a better time to be a Stephen King fan. But really, it's never really been a bad time to be a Stephen King fan. I mean, many adaptations, and he's a very prolific writer. He releases 2 books most years, and his films always been, his books have always been adapted into TV shows and movies, and that's been going on since 2 years after his first novel was released. I mean, in recent news, we've got the brand new Never Flinch has just come up, brand new novel has just come out. We've had the trailer for it. Welcome to Derry. We've had trailer for The Long Walk just dropped. Mike Flanagan, who's a great creator, is moving on to Carrie TV show next, and he's also kind of preparing to release The Life of Chuck worldwide, which has shown lots of great reviews. So all of this has kind of served to be this real huge inspiration for me to start this series of vlogs. I want to explore the Stephen King Connected Universe, and I'm going to do this by delving into one book at a time in publication order. And I do want to do an overview of each book, let my opinions on it, explore maybe the impact and the history of the book, talk about the adaptations. I also want to discover how each book fits into a larger universe of Stephen King's world. Perhaps the most exciting aspect of King's work is how all his work is connected. I mean, before the MCU, before the Cosmere, there was the Dark Tower, and there was Castle Rock and Derry and Maine, and all these connective tissues throughout all of his work. And I will talk more about these connections, but more as we discover them. I mean, there's lots to do. There's a lot to do. But to quote, one of his novels, a long tale, like a tall tower, must be built stone at a time. So with that in mind, let's start at the beginning, and let's start with a girl named Carrie. Carrie was published in 1974 and was Stephen King's first published novel. The story goes that King himself didn't think he was very good at first, or that a long form novel would take too much time, be too time consuming, whilst he was relying on income from selling short stories just to support his family. And it was his wife Tabitha who fished a version of it out of the trash and told him to keep going with it, earning her the dedication at the beginning of the book. And so Carrie is written in a combination of styles. It combines kind of third person style narrative and epistolary style segments. These come in the kind of forms of interviews and book excerpts and news reports, and it kind of tells the story of this high school girl, the titular Carrie, as she comes into womanhood. Carrie is an outcast at school, relentlessly and mercilessly tormented by her classmates. Her home life is not much better. She's the only child of Margaret White, a religious fanatic who flat out neglects and mentally and physically abuses her daughter. And after she gets her first period in a traumatic, really traumatic scene from the beginning of the book, Carrie's burgeoning kind of telekinetic powers start to come to the fore, and this, along with her reaching puberty, sets her and her mother on this like collision course. And meanwhile, one of Carrie's classmates is trying to make amends, whilst another, as on the opposite side of the spectrum, is kind of planning the ultimate humiliation. And all of this will come to a head at prom. If you've not read Carrie before, I would advise you to do so if you don't want to be spoiled anymore, as after like kind of this one in here, I'll be discussing kind of novel fully. So let's dive deep into the world of Carrie. So the inciting incident in Carrie is so well devised and so well written. I mean, anyone who knows anything about Carrie or thinks of the book or the film, or any of the films, two images come to mind usually, and they both involve blood. The book opens with Carrie getting her first period in the communal showers at school. Carrie has no idea what's happening and immediately starts thinking she's dying. She's scared, she's crying, and she's asking for help, and she is mocked and laughed at by every other girl in that shower. That is until her gym teacher comes in and tells the other girls off, but in the process slaps Carrie to snap her out of her kind of hysterics. And this scene does so much work to establish so much about Carrie's world, and to set everything in motion going forward for the rest of the novel. It's such a fantastic opening scene. It's so visceral and so real, but first of all, it also like kind of tells us so much about Carrie and her and her mother, even though she's not in the scene. But the fact that Carrie has been allowed to hasn't been forewarned and taught, and has been allowed out in the world without this like kind of basic knowledge about what's going to happen to her body as she grows over, kind of shows you like her mother is stepping over that line where kind of protection can become neglect. So we already know that. And also, like, this is a room full of girls, and I know people say like, "Oh, girls are horrible, like, can be horrible to each other," but all of these girls have had periods. They've gone through this experience, and there is no empathy for Carrie in that room, and that's even backed up by when the teacher, Miss Desjardins, slaps her, and she kind of feels a slight sense of pleasure from doing it. This goes to show kind of like how much of an other Carrie is, like how much of an outcast she is, almost like the other girls can sense something wrong with her, like just that she's wrong, and whether that wrongness, I don't know, comes from her telekinetic abilities or how she's just like kind of a constant reminder to these girls of the abuse and neglect that kind of exist in the world, and how different she is, just kind of reminds them of injustices as they just don't have the power to fight or to kind of exist right in their town. And the scene also kind of reminds me of Lord of the Flies and how like all those feral boys attack Piggy, and where Carrie kind of ceases to be human to these girls at this point when they're tormenting her. And kind of like interestingly, later on, King describes Carrie as someone that none of the girls even think about when she's not there. They don't go out of their way to harass her, but when she is there, something about her means they just can't stop themselves. And then later on in the novel, we kind of find out that Carrie can push her emotions physically onto others, and I can't help but wonder if this torment that Carrie's kind of going through comes from Carrie and how she sees herself, and this is how she feels about herself, and she's projecting it onto these girls, so they treat her like that. I don't know. And I mean, the scene also sets up so many themes of the book, like such as ostracism, female sexuality and shame around that, the fear and shame that like Carrie exhibits when she gets her first period, and the way that this disgust her classmates can seem as like a real contemporary kind of commentary on the social kind of stigmas of the time. But it's also like a physical sign of Carrie becoming a woman. Like the fact that this event is what triggers Carrie's telekinetic abilities starts kind of to explore the idea of feminine power. And it's not just the inciting incident for Carrie's powers, it's kind of the inciting incident for everything else that happens. Like the guilt that Sue Snell feels after this event lead her to ask Tommy to take Carrie to the prom. The punishment that Chris receives from this, like being banned from prom, seeks her to leads her to seek revenge against Carrie. The betrayal that Carrie feels from her mother for not having told her, and her mother's accusations afterwards, like, makes Carrie question her mother's actions and knowledge, and kind of starts Carrie on this path away from her. Whilst for Margaret White, knowing that Carrie has matured now, she kind of becomes scared of her daughter. Margaret kind of sees sex as a sin, and Carrie's burgeoning sexuality just kind of is an affront and a trigger to Margaret, who conceived Carrie herself through marital rape. So we kind of know all of these things all start right with a period. When we think of Stephen King and we think of him as like the king of horror, we often think of the supernatural scares, the vampires at the window, the clowns in the sewer. Carrie in full flow at the end of the novel as she rampages through the town and through the streets. I mean, some of his scariest creatures, though, or creations to me, are very human. I mean, and there aren't many scarier, to be honest, than Margaret White. I mean, she's deranged in her religious fanaticism, shut off from the real world, and just outright abusive towards her own daughter. And one of the things I've generally noticed from like the Stephen King books I've read, I've not read all of them, but I've read quite a few. That's why I wanted to do this. Is this kind of looks at like the horrors that lurk behind the closed doors, the everyday horrors that we don't see or we choose to turn a blind eye to, and Margaret kind of embodies that completely. And she also kind of depicts how abuse is a cycle. She was abused, and therefore she abuses Carrie, who in turn ends up abusing the whole town. And I think there are kind of two main antagonists in this book. We don't count Carrie herself as an antagonist. One of them for me is Margaret White, and then the other is obviously Chris Hargison, and her. So Chris and her boyfriend Billy as well, kind of as a joint too. And they're a more regular type of evil, kind of, I think, for Stephen King. Like, they're just this everyday cruelty that kind of just stems from like this innate selfishness or just a sense of entitlement. Anyway, one question I do have though is Carrie a horror novel? Because in my eyes, it's not. I mean, King is the king of horror, and this certainly has its shocking moments. But I found nothing here like truly terrifying. The power of Carrie is as a tragedy. Through the inserts of the other sources throughout the novel, we know that something bad is coming. By following Chris and Billy, we know what they're planning. The pig's blood may be like a callback to the Lord of the Flies and Piggy, but we know that like something terrible will happen, even whilst King, as he does, gives us hope that it might turn out okay, and that's in the form of Tommy. And then Tommy is written as like this genuine beacon of light and hope for Carrie, and he has like this innate goodness that goes beyond just doing his girlfriend a favour and taking her to prom. Like, if Chris and Sue are polar opposite characters, so are Tommy and Billy, definitely. And King kind of makes you believe, as Carrie believes, that Tommy could actually like her, that there is hope for her in the future. It's like, and it's that hope that kills you. And what Stephen King does so sadistically well is he kills the hope. And we all know the scene, whether that's through the novel or Brian De Palma's movie or just through pop culture permeation. The bucket of pig's blood falling on Carrie. That's Chris's revenge and kind of the ultimate humiliation for Carrie. That kind of mirror image from the start of the film as well. With a bigger room full of more blood, more people, everyone laughing hysterically at her. And it's like, is that what makes Carrie finally snap? It could be, but I don't think it is. Carrie's like dealt with lots of humiliation before, and maybe with the possession of these new powers, she can now get her revenge. But Carrie to me isn't Chris. And for me, it's when the bucket falls and hits Tommy in the head, and reading between the lines, it does kill him at that point. I think it's his death, this hope kind of just being yanked away from her, that sends Carrie over the edge and begins her rampage kind of through the town. And like, this all, as we know, culminates in a showdown with her mother. And this is where, for me, Stephen King gets Carrie to extract her revenge on her mother in such a chillingly personal way, by telekinetically stopping her mother's heart. It's such a measured, precise, and controlled execution that the horror here is King telling us that Carrie has truly become the monster. This isn't someone just lashing out. This isn't her emotions just kind of bubbling over and causing her powers to go out of control. This is someone fully in control who is deliberately killing people. And whilst you'll think her mother deserves it, there's also a whole gym full of kids who didn't. And there's also this clear from, like, Carrie setting off all of the fire hydrants as she walks away from the school, like purposefully preventing the fire brigade from even putting out the fire. And she completes kind of her revenge cycle by killing Chris and Billy. And at this point, right at the end of the novel, this is where the novel is bookended by blood. I talked about it at the beginning, like that. Blood is definitely a theme of this, and it's always easy to think of the opening period and the pig's blood, but there's one more instance of where blood has like the through line through the book, and that's whilst Carrie is dying herself, she's found by Sue Snell, and then Carrie, using her telekinesis to link with Sue, rummages through her memories. She finds out like that Sue didn't plan the prank. It's not Sue's fault. Whether it's that or the fact that she knows that Sue loved Tommy too, or that she was trying to be too nice to Carrie, I don't know. But in the end, Carrie doesn't kill Sue. As Carrie dies, Sue can feel her die, and as this happens, Sue starts to bleed, and what can be interpreted as a period or a miscarriage. And this gives us like two ways of interpreting the end. And as you could have interpreted Carrie's period as either the beginning of her adulthood or the start of the end for her. For Sue, this is either the complete end of Tommy, if it was Tommy's child, and in this case the end of hope and the start of something new. This being King, and from the feeling from the excerpts from Sue's book that she never really moves on from this, it might feel like the more pessimistic reading is more appropriate. I mean, I've enjoyed Carrie every time I've read it. I mean, it's not the best Stephen King by far. It's definitely not the best he has to offer, but as a debut novel, it's incredibly strong. I mean, I'm going to try and rate these books as I go, but I can't rate them on an ordinary scale at all. Against other books, Carrie is that aren't written by Stephen King, easily a 4-star read, but against other Stephen King books, it probably sits at a 3-star for me. I'm not going to be putting any kind of connections into this to like the other multiverse, because how I want to approach this series is I'm going to talk about the connections as I find them, rather than being like, oh, here's Carrie, here's the first novel, by the way, this and this all connects to this later on, because that's just me. Either I don't know them, I'm reading them off of Wikipedia, or and it ruins it for me, and it ruins it for. I want it to be an organic journey that will kind of, as we go on the journey, I'll be trying to find the connections between the different works. But what we do have for now is this main kind of location in Chamberlain, Maine. We've got some really iconic characters. We've got the introduction of telekinetic powers. We know that exists within a Stephen King universe. And as well, we've got the introduction to one of the greatest novelists to ever do it, and it also brings for me about some like themes from Stephen King's work. So this theme of, with Carrie in particular, this theme of she could have been good if more goodness had been put in, like being relayed to her. She could have ended up good if she'd had more. It has, it's good and evil on a small scale, but it's also hope, which I think, and hope in the good, which I think is such a strong theme from Stephen King's work, is that the characters who hope and have hope and believe in good generally end up in a better situation, or they're more likely to succeed in defeating evil. Whereas Carrie didn't have as much, I guess Carrie hadn't been shown enough good through her life to believe in it or to feel it, and she ended up turning bad. Anyway, that's the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's definitely something new for me, trying out a full series of, just something that I knew I was going to be interested in, which was going to be reading through all of Stephen King's work in publication order. I'm going to be doing a couple of other series alongside it, so there's going to be the main novels as a publication order, and then there's also going to be a thing I'm going to call Short King, which is going to be going through Stephen King short stories. So that'll be separate to kind of the main vlog, and then King on screen, where I'll be kind of looking at movies. So I'll probably do one of the Carries at least soon. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been, something I'm really excited about because it's something I'm really passionate, and yeah, and it gives me a lot of motivation to read all of these Stephen King novels that I've been waiting to. So if you do like it, please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching this video if you made it this far, and long days and pleasant nights.